Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Okay, so back again and ready to go for this session. I hope you have all had your lunch and
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. So today being Sunday, I don't know late lunches, but
Had your lunch, ma'am?
I am yet to have because of the class ended at 11. I had a very late breakfast.
Okay.
I'll finish your class and then go for lunch.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so yeah, we were discussing, I think, Jhumpa Lahiri, and I just gave you the gist of the story. So what I will do is I'll kind of wind it up because somewhere I kind of left it a little out. Yeah. So since it was already time, so now I just have to talk a little bit, okay, and then I'll go on to Ambedkar. So already I told you how Interpreter of Maladies is a short story by Jhumpa Lahiri, who is an American writer of Indian descent. And I told you this was earlier published in a magazine, and then this was reprinted in 1999 as the title story of the author's first short story collection. And I also told you that this won the Pulitzer Prize. And in fact, this title story that is prescribed for us, it won the O. Henry Award. And in fact, this story has been included in a collection of stories called the Best American Short Stories. And also, I told you about how the story is about the Das family, Raj Das and Meena Das. So this is an American family of Indian descent, Indian origin. And I told you these people are on a trip to India to visit their relatives. And as part of their, stay in India, they wish to visit some places, tourist interest places. And this is when they hire an Indian guide, tour guide. And this guide is known as Mr. Kapasi. And we also come to know that besides working as a guide, he is also an interpreter for a doctor, because many of these doctors' patients, they speak a language which the doctor does not know. And during this trip, we come to know that Meena Das is not a very happily married woman. And so this is where she confesses a secret to Kapasi. And she hopes that, since he is an interpreter of maladies, maybe he will be able to he will provide a solution for her malady, because, she has this secret which she has not shared with anybody, but this has been tormenting her, this has been torturing her, because she's been carrying that burden. So she thinks by sharing it with him, he will be able to offer some kind of a, solace or cure. So actually, Lahiri in some interview has said that she had come across an interpreter, like this. One of her friends had worked like an interpreter for a doctor. And so Lahiri has said in that interview that one day she would write a story, so what we know as interpreter of maladies. Of course, she has said that she wrote it much later, but basically she says that I wanted to have this title, Interpreter of Maladies, for this short story collection, and I wanted it to be the title story, because in this interview, Lahiri has said that actually the book, the stories in the book, they convey, the difficulty or the dilemma, and many times, several difficulties in communicating, particularly communicating emotional pain. So she says, most of these stories express the impossibility, almost impossibility of communicating emotional pain to others, also expressing it to ourselves. I think many of us, experience such things many times where, there is so much pain, but it's difficult to explain it to others. Sometimes it's difficult to explain it to ourselves also. So in that sense, this story, as I told you, tries to explore this. And already I told you the story, how these people are visiting India and then they are on a tour. But I told you this is an American couple, though they are of Indian origin, but they live in the United States in New Jersey. So already I pointed out how they dress and talk like the Americans, and they have these 3 children. And so they are going on this sightseeing trip when, the Mr. Kapasi, this is a young couple, and the middle-aged Kapasi is their, driver come guide. He is actually taking them to see the Sun Temple at Konark. And so they see a lot of children on the road. The children see the monkeys, and, they're excited by all that, because in America, they have never seen monkeys outside the zoo. And so here, I'll just explain this. The husband asks the guide to stop the car so that they can take a photograph. And so they keep stopping here and there to take pictures. And then they also take one picture with Mr. Kapasi, and that is where he says, please send me a picture. And that is where he writes on a piece of paper his address so that they can send him the photograph. Remember last time I told you that slip of paper falls from her bag. So this is the occasion there. And then, of course, as I told you, Mr. Kapasi has his own interpretation of this couple, and he finds them to be very different than Yeah, sorry about the network issues. So I was telling you about the tourist guide, and how he says he wants to be actually an interpreter between nations. And but unfortunately, because of circumstances, he takes up a job, and he needs money to survive and all that. So Meena Das, she shows a lot of interest in him, and Kapasi is very flattered. This lady, American lady, she's showing so much interest in me. And so they start talking a lot. She listens to him also. And then at one place already I told you, the husband and the children go to see the temple, but Mrs. Das stays back, okay, later. So she stays back, and that is when Mrs. Das confesses, okay, to Mr. Kapasi, and she actually tells him the story of a marriage. So she says that she and Raj were married when they were very young. And then she talks about how she got very lonely. She started feeling lonely at home, just looking after the children, while her husband, worked as a school teacher. So basically she brings out, slowly over a period of time, their marriage, where she starts feeling very desperate and lonely, She longs for company, but she doesn't get. So you have to understand the context in which this takes place, right? So she says it was during this time that her husband's friend comes to stay with them for a week for some interviews, and this is where she gets friendly, and then they have physical intimacy. And of course, the friend goes on to marry somebody else later. The couple are in touch with each other, but she gets pregnant, and one of the children, Bobby, is the father of Bobby is this friend of her husband. But Mrs. Das does not tell either her husband or this friend about this. So now she tells Mr. Kapasi that she has been feeling terrible about this. She has been keeping this as a secret, which is weighing on her mind, and she thinks that if she can share with him, and he being an interpreter of maladies, is able to say something to her. But unfortunately, Mr. Kapasi feels very shocked and surprised by the story. In fact, he feels very insulted because she asks his help. He thinks, because he is looking at it from the Indian perspective, right? So he feels very insulted. Anyway, he thinks, okay, let me help her. And then he advises her, saying, why don't you confess the truth to her husband? And so he also says, maybe I can act as a mediator between you both. While saying so, this again I said earlier, he begins by asking her, he wants to say that, but he begins by asking her, what is she feeling now? Is she feeling pain or is it guilt? And this is where, she is unhappy by the question, and she doesn't want to answer it because she understands Kapasi doesn't understand her situation. Okay. He is judging her, he is judgmental, and he looks at it as though it's a blunder committed by her, whereas she explains the circumstances, right? So she is unhappy with the way he questions, and she does not answer at all, right? So she just goes away because they are both sitting in the car and talking, and she just gets out of the car and starts walking away. So, and of course, they leave, and so she is also very, very, and as she gets down from the car and was walking away, she takes out something from the bag, and that's when that address that he has given also flies and falls down, and the kind of story ends with this children are attacked by a monkey, and monkeys represent the beast, the brute force. But of course they kind of go and rescue the child, and that's where the story ends as such. So basically, in this story, what Jhumpa Lahiri has tried to talk about two cultures, two individuals, and born in very different contexts, but both of them are kind of disappointed. Meena Das is disappointed in Mr. Kapasi, and Mr. Kapasi also is disappointed because both of them have had different views as such. So in this, remember, Jhumpa has said the difficulty of communication, particularly of the emotional complexity. So that she has tried to convey in the story. That's also one of the major themes, the lack of communication or the difficulty of communication, where you're not able to express your pain to others, and others are not able to understand it. So she has explored that. And of course, the context I already told you is two cultures, right? Though this couple is of Indian origin, but they are completely American in their approach to life, in the way they eat, the way they, the relationship between the husband and wife and the parents and children. And the parents are also not like oppressive, they don't try to control the children. Children are also given a lot of freedom. and the children sometimes, don't, they go away from the parents, and they have enough independence and freedom. So the parents are not like running after them constantly, hand holding them. So all those things, Kapasi also notices. So all those aspects of the diasporic writing, right? The diasporic population and the diasporic experience also comes in here. But the one of the important themes is the difficulty, in communication, and also the kind of relationships that married couples share for whatever reasons. Okay, because you can look at it as the story between, exploring the marital relationship between the dasas. So that's also there. So you can look at it from various perspectives as such, right? So you can read the story. As I said, I think you'll find a PDF and on the net, and it's not a very long story, so you should be able to read it as such, right? So with that, I think I'll stop discussing Lahiri, okay, Jhumpa Lahiri. And then I'll move on to the last text in my discussion. But if somebody has read the story, perhaps if you want to come out with your, response to the story, somebody can do it in just 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, then if there's nothing to discuss here, I'll move on to the next text, and we'll quickly discuss this this text, and perhaps. Okay, so the last of the text that I'm discussing with you is B.R. Ambedkar's The Annihilation of Caste. So this is a prose piece that you are going to read here. As I pointed out already, so far we have done fiction. Unit 3 was fiction, and Unit 5 also we did short fiction, right? So works of imagination. So the Annihilation of Caste by Ambedkar is a very different text. So it is not a work of fiction, it is prose, and it's a very serious text. Many of you may be aware of the text, some of you may have read it, some of you are familiar perhaps with the arguments, but let us try and look at this text. Obviously, again, I'll not be able to go into great details of the text, but what I'll try to do is I'll give you, as usual, the background to the text, the context in which this text we are reading, when it was written or prepared, and then I'll give you the major ideas contained in the text as such, right? So, in a way, it is a historical piece, right? It reveals a lot about the historical context also. So all that we have to keep in mind. But I have to explain the context in detail for you to understand before we go ahead with the text as such. Now, as I said, this text is written by Dr. Ambedkar. And I really wonder if any one of us needs, to know needs to read an introduction to Ambedkar, because all of us are familiar with Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, who is one of India's most radical thinkers. So we know how radical he was in his thinking, and how he transformed, the social and political scene in the struggle against British colonialism. We also know Ambedkar, he was a prolific writer, right? He has written several works, and we also know him, of course, many of us, most of us know him as somebody who was the chair of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution. So his contribution as he oversaw the drafting of the Indian Constitution. And we also know that Ambedkar served as India's first law minister. And we also know some of his famous statements. It was in the year 1935, he had publicly declared that though he was born a Hindu, but he would not die as a Hindu. And we know that just before he died in 1956, he embraced Buddhism. He converted to Buddhism just a few months before his death in 1956. So if you look at his dates, 1891 to 1956 we are talking about. And you can remember the socio-cultural context or the socio-political context of these times. And we all know that Ambedkar was born in quote unquote, right, untouchable family. But we know with his intelligence, with his with his radical thinking, we know he has gone on to become one of the most radical thinkers and writers, and who has there seems to be serious problem with the network issue. So keep reconnecting. Yeah, so I was talking about how the contribution of Ambedkar, most of us know. And I was telling you how he was popularly known as Baba Saheb. And he was not only, I already mentioned, India's first law minister. So he was a jurist, he was an economist, he was a politician. And above all, we can remember him as a social reformer, who was a social reformer, and he very strongly campaigned for social reform, and he campaigned against social discrimination. And then if you know his story, he really had faced unimaginable hardships, but with his brilliance, he was able to get scholarship and study. And then we all know he went on to attend Columbia University in the USA. And even today, the Columbia University is proud of its alumnus, Ambedkar. So we know that he acquired several degrees, and he did his doctorate in economics, and so he basically he was a brilliant scholar, a brilliant mind, right? And who had deep insights into the functioning of the society and the caste system. And so he has worked as a professor, earlier. And then, of course, when he comes back to India, he has joined the movements against the evils of untouchability. So that is the background that one has to keep in mind before we go to the text as such. Now, coming to the text, Annihilation of Caste. What is what one has to remember is that this is actually he prepared this as a speech to be delivered, right? So the Annihilation of Caste is actually, he planned it as a speech to be delivered. I'll give you the in detail, because knowing the context is also very important. So this speech, he prepared it, but unfortunately, the speech could not be delivered. That's why, when he kind of published it, the cover is also very interesting, because, it simply says that, I'll just read out the cover page. It says, Annihilation of Caste, speech prepared by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, MA, PhD, DSc, barrister at law, for the annual conference of the Jat Path Todak Mandal of Lahore, but not delivered. So this is the cover page of this text, which was published in 1936. Okay. So what is interesting is, this is a speech prepared by Ambedkar for the annual conference, Jat Path Todak Mandal of Lahore, but not delivered, right? There's also the reason mentioned there, owing to the cancellation of the conference by the reception committee on the ground that the views expressed in the speech would be unbearable to the conference. So this is the cover page, right? And this was published on 15th May 1936. And it was priced at rupees 8, right? We're talking about 1936, and it was priced at rupees 8. So, at least for me, when I looked at this, naturally you are very curious, because before actually going to the text, I knew about Annihilation of Caste and the general idea of, what he has said in this. But the history behind this also is very, very important. The history behind the text, how it was meant to be delivered, but it was not allowed. After inviting him to deliver the speech, the same committee kind of stopped it. So that's why this cover page it speaks a lot, right? So naturally you want to know what has happened there, right? So now first we'll have to look at what is this Jat Path Todak Mandal of Lahore, and when they invited Ambedkar to speak in their conference, then suddenly why they decided to cancel the conference, and also they did not allow him to speak as such, right? So to know a few more details, this Jat Path Todak Mandal, if you translate it literally, Forum for the Breakup of Caste. So those who follow Hindi, you can understand Jat Path Todak Mandal, right? Forum for the Breakup of Caste. Actually, it was a radical wing of the Arya Samaj. I think many of us are familiar with the Arya Samaj, which is a Hindu reformist organization. And this was founded in 1875 by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. Remember, those of you know Arya Samaj was founded by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. So we know that Arya Samaj was a Hindu reformist organization. And the reason they did it, not only Arya Samaj, the Brahmo Samaj earlier, and there were many other things which were established. In this context, you have to remember, India was under the British colonial rule. And, the British colonizer, the British ruler, justified the British rule in India by saying that, we were backward. There were several problems like caste, like, women, so they were talking a lot about social evils, and they justified their rule over India. So in that context, several reformers who, did find that these were the things, and they started to reform, right? They started, right from Rajaram Mohan Roy, who founded Brahmo Samaj. So you have several people, you have several reformers in the 19th century who fought against the social evils, the child marriage, the widow status of widow, the sati. Ram Mohan Roy, everybody knows, his fight against sati and how this was prohibited. So basically, social reformers were trying to look at reforming the several practices in Hinduism which were very oppressive, right? So they were trying to do that. And as part of that, we have one radical wing, which is the Jat Paat Todak Mandal, because caste is also one of the very, very oppressive, institutions in India, unfortunately, right? So this was founded, and it is said that there is somebody called Sant Ram, and some 22 men and women. They met in Lahore, and they wanted to form a separate outfit to fight caste, because Arya Samaj was trying to reform many beliefs and many systems in the Hinduism. But these people wanted to go a little further, and they said, we want to have a separate outfit to fight caste. So, in fact, I'm just giving you the background for you to understand the context, okay? So in his writing, Santram has said that, he had suggested the name Jat Paat Todak Mandal. And of course, there were so many founding members here. I won't go into all the names as such. But the point is, this organization came up in order to break the caste. But later critics have pointed out, okay, that this organization, did not have quote unquote untouchables, right? So Ambedkar draws attention to this also in his address, right? So then what was this organization meant for? What was this forum meant for? So for them, they wanted interdining, because we are talking about 1930s, where people of different castes, did not even eat together, and intermarriage, marriage between different castes was also looked down upon. So we have had all this, and the Mandal was basically interested in getting on kind of removing these kind of practices. So they encouraged interdining and intermarriage and all that. And so I believe there was an annual subscription fee of paying 2 rupees, okay, for members. And so this membership was given to those people who had to take a vow, okay, to marry themselves or their children out of their caste. So they wanted to encourage intercaste marriage and interdining and things like that. So this is just a brief background to the Jat Paat Todak Mandal. So it considered itself as radical because it was kind of challenging the caste arrangement. But later, as in the address, Ambedkar has pointed out, it looks like as though the so-called untouchables were not part of this at all, right? So that is the background. So you can understand the cover where he says, this Jatpat Mandal, Jatpat Todak Mandal, sorry. It had asked Ambedkar. So going to the next thing, in that preface, Ambedkar has said that this Jatpat Todak Mandal used to have annual conferences. Okay, it used to have annual conferences, and so they had this planned this conference, and they had invited Dr. Ambedkar to preside over their conference, conference. Okay, so they had invited Ambedkar to deliver its annual lecture in 1936. Okay, so Ambedkar, had agreed, and so the Jatpat Todak Mandal asked Ambedkar to send them the text of the speech in advance. Okay, so they wanted to know what he would be talking about. So Dr. Ambedkar sends the text. I mean, if you are interested, you can read those detailed prefaces, okay, where Dr. Ambedkar has in detail explained his experiences,
Excuse me, madam, you are not audible.
I think I'm having constant network issues, so it's disconnecting. Anyway, yeah. So I think we should hurry up. I don't know when this network is so unreliable. So he sent the text, and suddenly this forum, which had invited Ambedkar to deliver his speech, they found it unacceptable. So they say that we cannot accept this because the Mandal suddenly realized that Ambedkar's plan was not just to criticize the practice of caste, but he was going to denounce Hinduism. Okay, so see, talking about caste within the Hindu religion was acceptable for them, but when they realized that Ambedkar is going to strike at the very roots, okay, of the Hindu religion, they withdrew their invitation. So that's how Ambedkar says, my speech was meant to be delivered, but it was not delivered. Okay, it was meant to be spoken, but it was never delivered. The background to that is this, that they had invited, but as soon as they realized what is the content of Ambedkar's speech, they withdrew the invitation. So Ambedkar, what he did is, in May 1936, he printed 1,500 copies of this text of his speech at his own expense. He spent money and he printed about 1,500 copies of this speech. And soon it was translated into 6 languages. Okay. And so since then, Annihilation of Caste has been printed and reprinted, okay, and by several presses mostly Dalit-owned presses and read definitely by mostly Dalit readers, okay, since the last 7-8 decades. So 1936 we are talking about, now we are in 2021, right? So in a way, if you see, it's one of the most widely read books in India, but still, it doesn't have the kind of visibility that some other books have had, right? So this text was basically written for primarily for a privileged caste audience, okay? But it so happens that this audience did not get to hear that. So that's the background that you have to remember also. And then, so first edition, 1936, several copies printed. There was a lot of demand. So there was a second edition printed in 1937. And in this also, 1937 is the second edition, and then 1944 is the third edition. So we can read Ambedkar's preface there, right? So in the second edition also, he pointed out that this speech was prepared by me for the Jatpat Todak Mandal, right? And he says that because it was not delivered, I printed 1500 copies, and Ambedkar has said in this preface that within 2 months of its publication, all the copies were exhausted. And then at that time itself, 37 we are talking about, it was translated into Gujarati and Tamil, and he says now it's being translated into Marathi, Hindi, Punjabi, Malayalam. And then he says the demand for the English text still continues. Why am I giving you all these details is to show since the time it was published, it has remained in demand, right? So he says that's why I have, it's become necessary to issue a second edition, okay? And so he says that because of the history of this, I'm not changing the format. I'm continuing to retain the original form in the speech form, right? So he says many people have asked me to rewrite it in the, in a way writing happens. But he says I have deliberately kept it in the speech form as such. And then, of course, when this was published, there was a response from Gandhi. We know that, the debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi also is there. So in this edition, he has pointed out, I have also added 2 articles written by Gandhi, who was reviewing my speech, okay? And also he says, I have put my letter to Santram. So this is in the second edition as such, right? And then the third edition also, he says it has become necessary because all the copies that were printed, they are exhausted. So in 1944, Ambedkar published the third edition, and but he says I'm retaining it as it is. So that is the background. That is the background of the text and the Annihilation of Caste that you have to remember. And then, of course, this was published in 2014, okay, by a publishing house known as Navayana. This Navayana is a publishing house which was founded by a person named S. Anand, and he felt that this book needs to be published by prominent publishing house, and he found it. And the aims and objectives of Navayana Publishing is they deal with the caste issues as such. So when they published this 2014 edition, it contains an introduction by Arundhati Roy, where Arundhati Roy has written an introduction called The Doctor and the Saint, referring to Ambedkar. So it has, so actually the introduction is also very long. It's like almost like a book. But so that is the history. So now coming to the text, the text as such. I don't know where to, because it's a long text, and obviously I can't give you everything. So I'm just wondering where do I take it, right? Okay, I'll try to give you not a summary also, because that's also difficult. I'll try to give you the highlights and some of the issues that are addressed by Ambedkar in this, right? Okay, so we all know that he himself was born in a Dalit, which was earlier classified as untouchable, and so he had suffered discrimination throughout his life, right? Just excuse me 1 second. I'm sorry. So, so he himself had personally experienced, like many people, he had experienced this discrimination throughout his life. And so after he returned to India from abroad, he undertook a lot of research, okay? And so all that is shown in many of his works, and it also comes out in this speech, the kind of in-depth study he had made of many scriptures, right? So I just gave you the whole history of how he was asked to speak, but the organization which had invited him, the organization itself refused to allow him to give his speech in the original form. So, Annihilation of Caste is it is an account, okay, a narration of the belief that social reform is more important, even more important than political and religious reform. Because initially, Ambedkar believed that reform can come through religious reform or political reform, but his experience in different places and listening to different individuals was that the social reform should be given utmost importance even before political and religious reform, right? So it is only through social reform that many forms of oppression which were prevalent in India then, those could be overcome. So then, talking about social reform, Ambedkar focuses, that it is very important to not just reform the Hindu society, it is important to reconstruct, right? So that is where he had a problem. I mean, people had a problem with him where others were willing to reform. They were not questioning the basis. They were not questioning the basics of the oppressive caste system. So, therefore, when Ambedkar kind of argues that it's important to reconstruct the Hindu society, it's important to break the caste system. It's important to annihilate it. It's important to destroy it completely. And therefore, he urges people that, all human beings are the same, and we cannot agree with the argument that one caste is fit to rule another caste. So basically his argument is that one caste is not fit to rule another caste. So that was the central argument that, if we really need the social reform, or, we need to break the caste system, and also, we should realize that one caste is not fit to rule another caste. So in this text, Ambedkar also sometimes disagrees with socialists also. Of course, he's not against socialism, but somewhere he believes that all of them cannot unite to bring about a socialist revolution, because he says, as long as caste system prevails, right, people cannot unite with a feeling of equality, with a feeling of fraternity. Okay? They cannot fight for a single justice. So that was also another of his major arguments, that socialism is fine, because what is basically socialism? It talks about the socialist revolution, economic reform, so that, wealth is not controlled by a small minority, and, the labor is contributed by the majority. But Ambedkar, though he was not against socialism, but he says this kind of a socialist revolution in India is very difficult, because in India, it is very important to understand the role that caste plays. And because of this caste, he says, people can never unite as one, because, you have your own caste loyalty. You have your own. You can see that also in the current political system, right? Caste, community, so many factors. Now, of course, it's even more complex. You have region, you have caste, you have religion, you have language, okay? So, the marginalized regions, for example. So there are so many complexities. So what is happening is, at least, I feel that, we are going on dividing more and more, right? Instead of trying to unite as human beings and trying to achieve progress as much as possible.
Ma'am, unable to hear you, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Maybe network problem.
Yeah, so we are talking about so many categorizations and subcategorization and subcategorizations, right? So basically, Ambedkar understood the complexity of the Indian social system, which is based on the caste division too, and then therefore he says that until the caste system prevails, it's not possible to unite also. Then he also says, talking about the freedom, right? He says, see, for example, the argument is that the Varna system is based on profession. So many people argue that, earlier the caste system is not based on birth, but the caste system is based on the profession that one practices, right? But Ambedkar points out that the division of labor is not a division which is based on choice. Okay? So supposing you are saying, okay, fine, there is Varna system, the division is based on your profession. But is there a choice? X profession, X caste, the person, I'm talking about those times. I mean, Ambedkar, when he's talking about, of course, post-independence, the constitution, so many things have changed, but a lot has to change. We all know that, right? So now, contemporary society we are talking about, it is like in legally, we have all rights. Constitution treats every citizen, right? You know how our constitution begins. We the people of India, right? We the people of India. So a constitution does not discriminate on the basis of religion, caste, gender, right? I mean, I'm just reminded of it. I'm telling you. When we talk about constitution, Indian constitution is one of the best constitutions because theoretically it provides the best, compared to many other constitutions. Even the wording when it says we the people of India, whereas American constitution, it all talks about man, right, and men. But by the time we come to 1947, the word people is included here because I don't know if you remember, in the Western nations, women got their right to vote very late. It's only in the early 20th century that Britain got its British women got their right to vote, and America also a little later than that, right? But in the Indian context, if you remember, the women got the right to vote along with everyone, right? So at the time of independence itself, right? So we do not have this discrimination at all. It begins with we the people. So it's very inclusive actually. But as we all know, the problem is in implementation. The problem is the change in the thought process. Of course, a lot has changed. Many of us, many changes have taken place. It's no longer the same as it was in 1936. We have moved, but there is a lot to be improved. Even now we see around us, there are several forms of discrimination, and caste still holds sway on the Indian psyche. And we know how this is exploited in the political, fabric of the country and the political leaders. There is so much of this kind of presence of caste. So coming back to what I was saying, so he says, okay, I mean, I think in some of the things he's answering Gandhi also, right? Because, many critics have said that the Varna system is nothing but division of labor. But Ambedkar points out that it is not a division based on choice, but, it's based on caste, right? And therefore, he says, as long as the Hindu section is divided on the basis of caste, then one cannot talk about equality at all. One cannot talk about equality. So he says that, when some people, for example, disagree with you, right? You are excommunicated. We see that even now, writers have written, many writers have written about the kind of discrimination they face because of, maybe it's not open because, it's illegal nowadays, but still you find the subtle kind of discrimination. If we notice, you can see that in their talk, you can see that in their language, the kind of language people use. So it is present. It's not as if it has disappeared, right? Though a lot has changed. But for Ambedkar, when he's talking, he says, we cannot talk about equality in this society as long as there is, excommunication. I mean, for example, at that time, when people disagreed with the views of the upper caste, they were excommunicated also. So therefore, the speech, in this speech, Ambedkar argues that Hindus do not have a consciousness of kind. In fact, they have a consciousness of caste, right? So they the consciousness is not as, one, right? But this is consciousness of caste, which I don't know, I too have, observed, because I mean, sometimes people don't hesitate at all to ask, what's your caste, right? Directly. I mean, for example, let us say I'm teaching here, okay? And to teach, what is important is what is my eligibility is, whether I'm eligible to teach, whether I fulfill the conditions to, teach. Of course, Constitution gives certain guidelines as to, have the certain kind of reservations. We talk about positive discrimination where, because of socio-historical, cultural factors, certain things need to be there, right? But still, my eligibility to teach should be not what my caste is, whether I have the required eligibility. So sometimes it used to happen in the earlier times where, people don't hesitate to ask you. And somehow I have seen that people get together also, basing on their caste loyalty also. I mean, I'm not being judgmental here. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. But what I'm trying to say is this is what Ambedkar is trying to say, that the Hindu consciousness is not of kind that we all are Hindus, right? Even that, right? So it is more a consciousness of caste. Therefore, he says that this needs to be taken care of, right? So somewhere he says, it has been not possible for a Hindu to overcome his duty of preserving caste, right? And so this is also one of the arguments in the text as such. And so because he kind of made this direct, what should we say, critique of Hindus and Hinduism, that's where the Jatpat Todak Mandal had a problem with his speech. We can understand that. Because what they were trying to do is bring in reform within Hinduism, right? But what Ambedkar says is that, he talks about the other religions also, and he says that it is in this religion that there is a section of society which is kept completely in the dark, right? And he also talks about, I'm sorry, there was a phone. So Ambedkar goes on to talk about how Chaturvarna, the Varna system, he says is absurd, okay? Because basically he says that this system has been made to safeguard people, and the other people are denied that kind of freedom, he says, right? So basically, for example, he says that not everybody has a chance to do what they wish. The freedom is denied. And also he says that particularly the Shudras, okay, they are denied the physical, political, moral, rights. They are denied. For example, a Shudra cannot become, Kshatriya, freedom of military, right? Or, education, for example. So this is all contained in the Chaturvarna system. And therefore, he says that the Shudras are ill-treated by all the three Varnas, right? We all know most Indians, we are familiar with the Chaturvarna, where you have the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra in that order, right? So he says that the Shudras have been ill-treated by all the three Varnas, okay? And he answers another charge. He says that there are several people, several Hindus who defend the caste system, saying that it exists in all religions, okay? he says that in Hinduism, each caste has a religious sanction. Okay, so what he says is, yes, there is discrimination perhaps in other religions, but in Hinduism, there is a kind of a religious sanction, right? Otherwise, if you look at other religions also in the world, there are sects and subsects, and of course, more research has been done now. So if you look at Europe of the Crusades, and so there is fight and there is killing, there is massacre, among other religious. So there have been religious wars, right, where people, for example, in Christianity, the basic sects, you have Catholicism and Protestantism, and we know that Catholics were persecuted in England, and yes, I think in your first year, if you remember, what is that novel? Graham Greene's Power and the Glory, right? A whiskey priest, if you recall that story, they were all, he is persecuted, right? There have been crusades, there have been wars. If you really look at human history, there has been some kind of conflict or the other, war or the other, killing or the other, and discrimination also, because if you really honestly analyze, there are several categories and subcategories in all sects, in all communities, most of them at least, right? But what he says is, it may be there. Many Hindus saying, it's not just in Hinduism, it's there in other communities also. But his argument is that the problem is this has a social, religious sanction, the religious sanction. Each caste has some kind of a religious sanction, and to discuss and describe all this, he keeps quoting, right? There are a lot of quotations, he uses from different scriptures. There are Sanskrit sayings, and there are so many things he is describing in this in his speech, right? So, in fact, he says that people alienate people of other castes, right? That is considered dharma. So he questions those, right? He questions those, and in what way is it justified to alienate people on the basis of other castes, right? So then, so he goes on kind of analyzing, and he gives several examples. He talks about how the very basis is problematic, right? So that's why it's very difficult to reform. So if you go back to Gandhi, Gandhi also was against untouchability, and while we were talking about Mulkraj Anand's untouchable, right? These people, he too was against untouchability, and in that context, we all discussed Gandhi also, right? He was also seriously concerned about this, but all these people were trying to reform within, right? And it's not as if they questioned the fundamental tenets, the fundamental principles as such. Whereas in this speech, Ambedkar strikes at the very root, okay, the very fundamentals, and that's where it was not really, it kind of alienated, it kind of isolated, and the Jat Paat Todak Mandal, which did encourage certain things, okay, but they were not very happy. So I was telling you how he says two possibilities is, one is the intercaste marriages, and the other one is, kind of the religious scriptures which advocate this kind of, discrimination should be we should be rid of those, right? So basically, Ambedkar believed that he says many Hindus, see, whenever we talk about this, it doesn't mean everybody, okay? At every point of time in history, there have been exceptions, but we are talking in a general sense also. So he says that Hindus who are against intercaste marriages, actually they say that they want to retain the purity and sacredness of their blood. Okay, so maybe they give those reasons that we have to maintain the purity. Actually, if you see, I'm just diverting here. Many of the issues that Ambedkar talked about in 1930s, many of the issues are still being debated, right? So the question of purity and pollution, while science has made such advances, we are so technologically and scientifically advanced that DNA and everything shows that actually there's nothing called purity. How purity is a myth, right? When you analyze DNA, it can tell you what is the component as such. So I was just reminded, and I was thinking how, after like 36 and we are in 2021 with so many advances, but still, these issues are continuing. Yeah, and somebody had put Jewish also. I mean, it's in other parts of the world also in different ways. Again, when we are talking about the Holocaust, again, this was also Hitler's concept of purity, right? Racial purity also. So here, coming back to Ambedkar, he says that Hindus who were against intercaste marriages, they say that their aim is to protect the purity and of their blood. But he says, in reality, they oppose it because they are afraid. They're afraid that they will lose their social and political power. Okay, so he says that this kind of division of society has given a certain section more social and political power. So actually, these people are afraid that if we encourage intercaste marriages, then their power will be lost. So I can actually apply it to the contemporary issues also, where the power elite, right? Earlier we had the caste elite, right? But today we are talking about the power elite. I think day before I was just listening to some talk, some book. I don't recall who the writer is, but this discussion was talking about the power elite. So now here it's not about caste or religion or things like that. It's a power elite, those who enjoy the power, right? So they were talking about that angle of society. So here Ambedkar pointed out how these people in reality actually were afraid of losing power over the other people, and therefore they were not for it, right? So, and then of course, I told you the second thing he said is the Shastras, okay, the scriptures which promote, the scriptures which contain ideas of social injustice, right? They should be destroyed. So he criticizes the scriptures which state that, whatever the rules are applied, they should be applied on the basis of caste. So he says that is immoral, that is evil, right? So basically, he says that, you can't have these kind of scriptures worshipped, the ones which advocate and justify and sanction, the practice of caste, which is so humiliating to certain sections of society or certain caste people, right? So therefore, he says scriptures like that, which contain, lot of, which advocate kind of social inequality and injustice, they should not be worshipped, and they should be, in fact, removed and destroyed. So this also, I think, has a lot, because the Jat-Pat Todak Mandal, if you read the correspondence between Ambedkar and the committee members and the president of this Jat-Pat Todak Mandal, it reveals, so they say that this part is not acceptable to, the people, and we didn't know you would be talking like this. And but Ambedkar, he says, I had no intention of doing this, but at the same time, I can't, just, in fact, he reveals in the correspondence, he says that these people write to him, we are willing to accept if you are not going to talk about this, or if you're going to remove this part from your speech. But Ambedkar says it's an insult to me. You have actually invited me. I didn't ask. You have invited me to be the president of this conference. And, once you invite, the president is given complete freedom to, talk what he wishes to within, certain things. But, and here you are kind of, so he is also not willing to take, Ambedkar, he has, been through so much. So obviously he will not be dictated to by these people. So that's where he says. So basically, in this text, Annihilation of Caste, where he argues for annihilating. Annihilation, is destruction. So unless caste disappears, or unless caste is actually destroyed, that society cannot make progress. And if one section of society keeps the other section of society oppressed and exploits it, then it doesn't bode well for the society. Society cannot make progress as such, right? And so then, of course, this text, one also has to, because in the third edition, I think, he also includes Gandhi's response, right? So what Gandhi has said in response to Ambedkar, in fact, it is said that after Ambedkar, Gandhi became more seriously concerned with the question of untouchables, right? But these two leaders were completely looking at it into very different ways as such. And that's one thing. So now what Gandhi responded, and he also said, is that Ambedkar has just picked out those texts which we don't know whether they're authentic or not, right? So what Gandhi says is, you just can't pick out on those texts and judge Hinduism, right? Because there is the best also. There is the best. We all know that, yes, there is the best of philosophy. There is the best of freedom. I mean, there are so many things which are there in the Hindu scriptures. So Gandhi says that, Ambedkar picked on only those which are of doubtful authenticity, right? And so he has selected the worst specimen to judge Hinduism, but Gandhi feels one should also judge it on the best that is also there in Hinduism. But Ambedkar, he responded back to Gandhi saying that, fine, but still the worst specimen cannot be ignored, okay? Because the worst specimen it may be, but it does talk about discrimination and injustice. So those also are considered as Shastras, as divine authority, isn't it? So how can they be discarded? So he says that, in fact, that's where there was a lot of difference between Gandhi and Ambedkar, two giants of, real big thinkers, right? But Ambedkar wrote saying that Gandhi is afraid that if he opposed caste system, then he will lose his importance in politics. So that's how Ambedkar responded to Gandhi. So somehow Ambedkar says that basically, the Hindu loyalty is restricted to its caste as such, right? So that's the argument that he makes in this speech, Annihilation of Caste. And of course, this was almost 90 years ago, right? And so in the present socio-political context, things have changed, but still things need to change. And I think maybe that's what we can keep in mind. And so in this, he asks people to dissociate themselves detach themselves from varna, from caste. Okay, but that's one thing. So this text had a great impact. Okay, but unfortunately, what has happened is, what Ambedkar tried to achieve, in trying to get rid of this kind of thing, but in some ways, this is also used to capitalize on the vote bank. So the vote bank politics is definitely again based on the caste equation as such, right? So, while you read this, besides talking about all these, this book provides a lot of insights into, world history, scientific reasoning. He quotes a lot from religious scriptures. Okay, so it is a very thought-provoking book, and it does point out the major problems. Okay, in the Indian, particularly for Ambedkar, the Hindu society at that time. He tried to change, but many people have pointed out, right, that though it is, kind of more than 85 years, okay, of this, neither caste has changed, okay. Still, it's a very strong system, right? Yeah, well, very rarely intercaste marriages do happen, and when they happen, we know there are all kinds of things, not only intercaste, but there are honor killings. And so the gender politics, the caste politics, the economic politics, so many things are all interwoven. They are all very complicated. Okay, so India's caste system is, one of the, I think, forms of very old kind of social stratification. The society is stratified based on this, right? And the point is, it's not just a division. In the division, there is a hierarchy. Okay, so there is a hierarchy. So that also has to be kept in mind as such. Of course, as I said, the Indian Constitution gives fundamental rights to every citizen, does not discriminate, as some of you put it, either on the basis of caste, sex, place of birth, language, religion, etc. But still, I think, I may be wrong, but we still live in a very graded social structure. So I would go beyond that and also say that we are not only graded in terms of caste and religion, but we are also graded in terms of class, right? The working class, the upper class, the rich class. I know, one has to think of several kinds of discrimination, because as, if our object is to have a society free from many of these evils, so one needs to, think beyond any kind of discrimination. For example, in the, let us say, West, we have been discussing the West also in some context, isn't it? If you look at the Western society, right? Look at the working class. It doesn't, for example, even if you are the president of America or you are a sweeper, it doesn't, discriminate. For example, if there is an occasion to eat together, it is possible. But in India, I have observed that, we all, that at least in some of my observations, we see that it is, if it is a family, it is the men eat first and women are still serving. And if it is the family eats first, and then if there are workers, domestic workers, they have to eat at the end. So what I'm trying to say is, somehow this kind of stratification, okay, whether it is caste stratification, social stratification, economic stratification, it's there. So of course things are changing, and as I said, there are many youngsters now, they have a very different view, and they're leading very different kinds of lives. So it's very encouraging when I see my own students, youngsters. Here I'm not able to see you in online mode, but when we meet, of course, last 1 year I haven't been able to interact physically with all my students, but when we see them, mingling and coming together, and for many. Today my net seems to be really bad because it's been disconnecting so many times. So anyway, what is the time? It's almost 3:10. Okay. So we'll just kind of wind up. So I was saying that this speech, as I said, on the one hand, it is so popular and it is so widely read and all that. But on the other hand, it has faced a lot of opposition also, right? So I think with that, I'll come to, I'll conclude the session. And yeah, so while I've been talking, some of you have asked about important points, important questions, but as I have said, try not to approach your syllabus in that way. I know you are busy. I know you have maybe several other engagements, and maybe you're all preoccupied, busy with personal, professional commitments. But still, my earnest urge, I would earnestly urge you to do look at, the syllabus holistically, not just from examination point of view. Though some of us need it for specific purposes, but I'm sure reading literature, will definitely broaden our horizons, right? So I think with that, though I know it's a little early, but I think you can also take a small break before your 3:30 session, it being a Sunday. I'll call it a day, and I'll conclude the session unless somebody wants to share something in the next 5 minutes. Okay, I can understand it being Sunday. Okay, so I think we'll call it a day. I'll leave the meeting then. You relax for some time before you go to your next session. Okay, thank you one and all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, morning I'll join very later, 1 hour. First topic, what you have finished, ma'am?
Ma'am, your voice is not audible, ma'am.
I'm not speaking. I'm just speaking. Somebody else is speaking, so I was listening to them. Yes, what were you saying, please? Can you just repeat that? You said you joined late. I heard.
Yeah, 1 hour late I joined. So first topic, it is finished. What was the topic you have discussed first one in the morning session?
Morning session, I discussed the two stories of Jhumpa Lahiri and Anita Desai. Jhumpa Lahiri is interpreter of Maladies and Anita Desai is accompanist. So I began by discussing accompanist first, and then I discussed interpreter of Maladies, which I continued a little in this session.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay then. So if there are no other questions, all the best.
అసలు రావట్లా
It is very good. Whatever you have-
తగ్గించండి తెలుసు ముందు ఆగు ఆగన్నా. హట్ హట్ హట్
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Your explanation is very good. We can able to follow without seeing the book. Now we can whatever we can write it. It's very good, ma'am. Thank you so much for your explanation.
Thank you for listening, because the point is not just the study material will be there anyway, right? So if you are able to catch the points and do your thinking, I'm sure it will go a long way, right? So wish you all the best. I know you have
Thank you,
some.
ma'am.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you, ma'am.
So thank you very much.